I found a diary, hidden in my mother's room, and it revealed a life I never knew existed. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The house smelled like her. Even 3 weeks after the funeral, even with all the windows thrown open to let October breathe through the rooms, I could still catch traces of my mother everywhere. Lavender soap, old books, that particular staleness that settles into a home when someone stops opening curtains. I stood in the center of her bedroom, surrounded by boxes I'd labeled in my careful handwriting. Donate, keep, undecided. The last pile was growing faster than the others. Every object I touched seemed to pulse with questions I'd never asked, conversations we'd never had. My mother had lived in this house for 37 years. I had known her for 42. And yet, standing among her things, I felt like an archaeologist excavating a stranger's life. She had been a quiet woman, my mother. Reserved. She taught piano to neighborhood children, kept a small garden, attended church on Sundays. She folded towels with hospital corners and never raised her voice. In my childhood memories, she exists in soft focus. A gentle hand on my forehead when I was sick. A figure in the kitchen window waiting for me to come home from school. We loved each other. I never doubted that. But there had always been a distance between us, a careful space she maintained like a gardener tending a hedge. I used to think it was simply her nature. Now, sorting through the debris of her life, I wondered if it had been something else entirely. The bedroom was the last room I'd saved to sort through. I'd done the kitchen, the living room, even the bathroom with its ancient medicine cabinet still holding her prescriptions. But her bedroom felt too intimate, too final. This was where she'd slept and dreamed and woken each morning to face another day of careful silence. I started with the dresser. Sweaters folded in neat squares, each one smelling faintly of mothballs. Underwear and socks organized by color. A jewelry box containing nothing expensive costume pearls, a few pairs of clip-on earrings, my father's wedding band on a thin chain. He'd been gone for 15 years. She'd never taken the ring off that chain. The closet yielded more of the same. Sensible shoes, conservative dresses, a winter coat I remembered from my childhood, its pockets still holding ancient tissues and a single button. Everything about this room spoke of containment, of a life lived within carefully drawn boundaries. It was only when I moved to the bed, stripping sheets that smelled like loneliness, that I noticed the irregularity. The nightstand didn't sit quite flush with the wall. When I pulled it away to vacuum behind it, I saw why. The baseboard had been removed and replaced, but whoever had done it, my mother, I assumed, hadn't matched the paint quite right. The new section was slightly darker, like a scar that hadn't fully healed. My heart began to beat faster. I don't know why. Maybe because, in all my years of living in this house as a child, visiting as an adult, I'd never noticed this imperfection. My mother noticed everything. She would never have left such obvious evidence of alteration unless she'd meant for it to remain hidden. I found a butter knife in the kitchen and used it to pry the baseboard loose. It came away easily, revealing a hollow space behind the wall. Inside was a shoebox, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. The box was heavy. When I opened it, I found a notebook, a journal. It was thick, bound in cracked leather, stuffed with loose papers and photographs that had been pressed between pages. The cover was worn smooth by handling, and when I opened it, the spine cracked with a sound like breaking ice. The first page stopped my breath. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I never had the courage to show you. Please, my darling girl, if you can, don't judge me too harshly. I did what I thought was right. I did what I had to do. But you deserve to know the truth. You deserve to know who I really was, before I became the woman you knew as your mother. The handwriting was hers, but younger somehow, more forceful. I turned to the next page, and the date made me blink. June 3rd, 1978. I was born in 1983. This diary began 5 years before I existed. I should have taken the journal home. I should have sat down in my own apartment with a cup of tea and processed whatever was coming in a safe, controlled environment. Instead, I sat on my mother's stripped bed, afternoon light falling through lace curtains, and I began to read. June 3rd, 1978. I met someone today. I shouldn't write this down. I shouldn't even be thinking about him, but I can't help it. His name is Michael, and he's nothing like the boys from church, nothing like anyone I've ever known. He's an artist. He paints. When he talks about color and light, I see the world differently. Mother would die if she knew I'd even spoken to him. He doesn't go to church. He lives in that converted warehouse by the river, the one Mother always says is full of degenerates and addicts. But when he looked at me today at the farmer's market, when he asked if I'd sit for a portrait, I felt something wake up inside me that I didn't know was sleeping. I read on, page after page, watching my mother transform from the woman I'd known into someone unrecognizable. The diary entries came in clusters, separated by weeks or months. Each cluster revealed a new layer, a new secret. In 1978 and 1979, she wrote about Michael constantly. The entries were intoxicated, almost delirious with feeling. She snuck out to meet him. They walked by the river. He painted her over and over, trying to capture something he said moved in her face like light through water. She fell in love, deeply, recklessly. The kind of love that made her willing to defy her strict religious parents, the kind that made her believe in transformation. There were sketches pressed between these pages, pencil drawings of a young woman I barely recognized. My mother, at 23, with wild hair and laughing eyes. In one drawing, she was nude, lying on her side, one arm draped over her head. The intimacy of it made me look away, embarrassed, as if I'd walked in on something private. Then came an entry from November 1979. I'm pregnant. I haven't told anyone yet. Not Mother, not Father, not even Michael. I'm terrified and exhilarated all at once. This wasn't the plan. We weren't ready. But when I think about our baby growing inside me, I feel joy so sharp it's almost painful. We'll have to get married quickly. Mother will be furious, but she'll forgive me once she sees the baby. Everything will be all right. It has to be. My breath caught. My mind raced through the math. I was born in April 1983. This baby would have been born in summer 1980. This wasn't about me. I flipped forward, searching for answers. The entries became sporadic, jagged. December 1979. Michael had disappeared. Simply vanished. He stopped coming to meet her. When she went to his warehouse studio, it was empty except for paintings leaning against walls, including 12 portraits of her, each one more desperate than the last. She searched for him, asked questions. No one knew where he'd gone or why. January 1980. I'm showing now. I can't hide it much longer. Mother noticed this morning, I think. She looked at me with this terrible knowledge in her eyes, but said nothing. I'm so afraid. Without Michael, I don't know what to do. I wrote to his sister in Boston. No reply. It's like he never existed, like I imagined everything. But the baby is real. The baby moves inside me, and I feel more alone than I've ever been. February 1980. Mother knows. She found me being sick in the bathroom and demanded the truth. I told her everything. I've never seen her so angry, so cold. She didn't cry or shout. She just looked at me like I was something broken beyond repair. She called me a whore. She said I've destroyed the family's reputation. Father won't even look at me. They're making arrangements, she says. I'm not allowed to ask what that means. March 1980. They're sending me away. There's a place upstate, a home for unwed mothers. I'll go there to have the baby, and then... I can't write it. I can't make it real by writing it down. They want me to give the baby up for adoption. Mother has already contacted an agency. She says it's the only way, that I'm too young, that the child will have a better life with a proper family. She says if I do this, if I cooperate, I can come home after and pretend it never happened. We'll tell people I was visiting a sick aunt. No one will ever know, but I'll know. God help me, I'll always know. April 1980. I felt the baby kick today. Strong kicks, like it's fighting already. I've started talking to it when I'm alone. I tell it stories. I sing. The other girls here are so young, some of them just 15 or 16. We don't talk about why we're here or what happens after. We exist in this strange limbo, growing bigger and bigger, waiting. I've decided to name the baby, at least in my heart. If it's a girl, Sarah. If it's a boy, James. I need to call it something. I need it to be real, even if only for a little while. Then nothing. No entries for months. When the diary resumed, the handwriting was different, smaller, more controlled, as if the pen was being held by someone trying very hard not to shake. August 1980. I had a son. James Michael, 7 pounds, 3 ounces. He had dark hair, so much of it, and when he opened his eyes, they were blue-gray like storm clouds. I held him for 20 minutes. That's all they allowed me. 20 minutes to memorize his face, to whisper everything I needed him to know. I told him I loved him. I told him I was sorry. I told him that if there was any other way, any way at all, I would have kept him. Then they took him away, and I signed papers that made him legally belong to someone else. I'm not allowed to know who adopted him. I'm not allowed to try to find him. Those were the terms. I gave up every right when I signed my name. Mother picked me up this morning. On the drive home, she said, "This never happened. You understand? You're going to come home, and you're going to live your life, and this never happened." I nodded. I didn't have any words left. I was crying now, tears falling onto the journal pages, smudging ink that was decades old. My mother had been 24 years old. She'd had a baby, a son, and she'd been forced to give him up. All while I grew up thinking I was an only child, thinking I knew her history. But the diary didn't end there. I wiped my eyes and kept reading. The entries over the next few years were sparse and bleak. My mother lived at home with her parents, worked at a bank, attended church. She wrote about feeling hollow, about going through motions. She never mentioned Michael again, but she wrote about James obsessively, wondering where he was, who he'd become, if he was happy. Every August 2nd, she wrote an entry on his birthday, imagining him at 1-year-old, 2, 3. Then, in January 1983, I met someone, Richard. He's kind and stable and safe. He works for the railroad. He doesn't ask too many questions. When he proposed last month, I said yes. Not because I love him the way I loved Michael. I'll never feel that way again. But because I'm tired of being alone with my grief. Because I want to build something, even if it's built on silence. Mother approves. She says Richard is a good man, which in her language means ordinary, forgettable, exactly what I need. Richard was my father. This quiet, sad woman who married him was pregnant with me 4 months later. I was born in April 1983, as planned, as acceptable. The daughter who could be acknowledged, raised, loved openly. But the diary revealed the truth beneath our family's surface. My mother loved me. The entries about my childhood made that clear, but she was haunted. Every milestone I reached, she wrote about James. When I lost my first tooth, she wondered if he'd lost his. When I started school, she imagined him in a classroom somewhere. She lived 2 lives simultaneously, the one with me and my father, and the shadow life with the son she'd been forced to abandon. My father, Richard, never knew. She was certain of that. He thought he'd married a quiet, slightly damaged woman who'd had a hard relationship with her parents. He never suspected the real reason she sometimes disappeared into sadness, why she volunteered at the children's hospital, why she refused to have more children after me. "I can't risk it," she wrote in 1985. "I can't bear to love another child and lose them. And I can't give Richard more when I already gave my heart away to a boy I'll never see again." The later entries were less frequent, but more desperate. She'd tried to find James several times over the years. Hired a private investigator in 1995, when he would have been 15, registered with adoption reunion databases, wrote letters to the agency that were never answered. The law was clear. Closed adoption meant closed. Unless he came looking for her, she would never find him. But then, in 2018, everything changed. October 14th, 2018. He found me. After 38 years, James found me. I got a letter today from an address I didn't recognize. When I opened it, I nearly collapsed. It was from him. He'd done one of those DNA tests, the kind everyone's doing now, and it matched him to someone who matched to me. He hired someone to trace the connection. And he wrote to me. He sounds angry. He has every right to be. He said he grew up knowing he was adopted, but he never knew why. He wants answers. He wants to meet me. He included his phone number. I'm terrified. What do I tell him? How do I explain what I did, what was done to us? How do I introduce him to a life where he doesn't exist, where his sister doesn't know about him? I haven't told anyone yet. Not Richard. Not you, my darling girl. I don't know how. The last entries were from 2019 to 2022, and they chronicled a secret relationship my mother maintained with James. They met in person 3 times, always in neutral cities, away from our town. He was a veterinarian in Colorado, married with 2 children. He looked like Michael, she wrote. The same dark eyes, the same artistic hands. Their meetings were complicated. He wanted a relationship, but he was also furious about the lost years. He blamed her, even though she tried to explain about her parents, about the times, about having no choice. Some wounds, she wrote, can't be healed just by explaining them. She never told my father, never told me. She carried this second relationship secretly until it became too heavy. In the last entry, dated December 2023, just 10 months before her death, she wrote, James has stopped answering my calls. His wife sent me an email asking me to stop contacting them. She said I'm causing him too much pain, that every time he talks to me, he falls into depression. She's not cruel about it. She's just protecting him, I understand. But God, it hurts. I found him only to lose him again. The adoption took him from me when he was hours old. And now, the damage of that separation is taking him from me again. There's a kind of loss you can't recover from, even with second chances. If you ever read this, please know I wanted to tell you. I wanted you to know you had a brother. But how could I? How could I explain that I kept such an enormous secret? That while I was raising you, loving you, being your mother, I was mourning someone you didn't even know existed? I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I'm sorry for the lies of omission. I'm sorry you had to grow up in a house full of ghost rooms, spaces I couldn't let you enter. I did the best I could with what I had. I hope someday you can forgive me. The journal ended there. The last pages were blank, waiting for entries that would never come. I sat on that bed until the light faded and the room filled with shadows. My hands ached from gripping the journal. My face was wet. My chest felt like something had cracked open inside it. I had a brother. Somewhere in Colorado, there was a man who shared half my DNA, who'd grown up in a completely different life, who knew our mother only through painful, stolen meetings. He existed, and I'd never known. But more than that, I'd never really known her. My quiet, careful mother had loved with volcanic intensity when she was young, had been broken by that love, had spent her entire adult life trying to contain the damage, to build a safe, normal life on top of a foundation of loss. Every careful boundary she'd maintained, every emotional distance I'd felt, it all made a terrible kind of sense now. She'd been protecting me, yes, but also protecting herself. She'd learned early that loving fully meant risking complete devastation. So she'd loved me carefully, holding back just enough to survive if she lost me too. I thought about all the times I'd wished she was warmer, more open. All the times I'd felt frustrated by her reserve. I'd taken it personally, thought maybe I wasn't enough to make her fully happy, but it had never been about me. It had been about a baby boy she held for 20 minutes, 38 years before I was born. I spent that night in my mother's house, sleeping in my old childhood bedroom. In the morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with the journal and the loose papers that had been pressed inside it. Among them were 3 photographs. The first showed a young man in front of an easel, paintbrush in hand, grinning at the camera. Michael. He was beautiful, dark eyes, high cheekbones, an intensity in his expression that made you want to know what he was thinking. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, Michael, summer 1978, the day everything changed. The second photograph was of a baby, red-faced and sleeping, wrapped in a white hospital blanket. James, the only picture my mother had of her son. I turned it over. August 2nd, 1980. 20 minutes. I will remember every second. The third photograph was more recent, printed on regular computer paper, slightly faded. It showed a man in his late 30s standing with his arm around a smiling woman, 2 children in front of them. He had my mother's nose, her eyebrows, my eyebrows, James with his family. On the back, 2018. He's happy. That's all I ever wanted. I spread the photos across the table and stared at them until they blurred. This was my family's real history, not the sanitized version I'd grown up with, the story of my parents meeting at a church social, their quiet courtship, their modest wedding. But this, wild love, forced separation, decades of secret grief, and a missing brother I would probably never meet. The question was, what did I do now? I could honor my mother's silence, close the journal, put it back in the wall, go on living as if I'd never found it. She'd kept this secret for a reason. Maybe she wouldn't want me to upend everything by seeking out James and his family. Or I could do what she'd never quite managed to do. I could tell the truth. I thought about James, the way my mother described him, angry, confused, hurt by the very reunion he'd sought. I thought about his wife's email asking my mother to stop calling. They'd set boundaries. They'd made their peace with it. Did I have the right to show up and disrupt that healing? But I also thought about myself at 10 years old, sitting at this same table, watching my mother stare out the window, with an expression I could never interpret. I thought about the distance I'd always felt, the sense that she was perpetually mourning something I couldn't name. What if I'd known the truth? What if, instead of taking her reserve personally, I'd understood the context of her grief? I pulled out my laptop, and before I could talk myself out of it, I searched James Michael plus veterinarian plus Colorado. It took me less than 10 minutes to find him. He had a practice in Boulder, a website with his photo that same face from my mother's picture, just older, with lines around his eyes. There was a contact form. I stared at it for a long time. Then I started typing. Dear James, my name is Catherine. I'm writing to you because I found something after our mother's death, a journal she'd kept for decades. In it, she wrote about you, about the circumstances of your birth and adoption, about finding you again, about loving you your entire life, even when she couldn't be in it. I didn't know you existed until yesterday. I'm still processing everything. But I wanted you to know that you weren't just a secret she kept. You were the wound she carried every day. You were the ghost at every birthday party, every family dinner. She never forgot you. She never stopped wanting you to be part of our lives. I understand if you don't want contact. I understand if this letter reopens pain you've worked hard to heal. But I wanted you to know that you have a sister who would like to know you, if you're willing. Not to replace anything or fix anything that can't be fixed, just to acknowledge that we're connected, that our mother loved us both in whatever ways she knew how. I'm attaching a photograph she kept of you and your family. She looked at it often, I think. It was pressed in the journal, right next to a picture of me at my college graduation. Whatever you decide, I hope you're well. I hope you have a good life. That's what she would have wanted most. Catherine. I attached the family photo, took a deep breath, and hit send before I could reconsider. Then I closed the laptop and sat in the silent kitchen, sunlight streaming through the window, where my mother had stood so many mornings, carrying her secrets like stones. I didn't expect a response. Or rather, I expected a polite rejection, if anything. So when my phone rang 3 days later from a Colorado number, I almost didn't answer. "Catherine?" The voice was male, hesitant. "This is James." My heart hammered. "Hi, yes, thank you for calling." Silence stretched between us, full of everything we didn't know how to say. "I got your email," he finally said. "And the picture. I didn't know she'd kept that. The journal was hidden in her room. I think she meant for someone to find it eventually. Or she couldn't bear to destroy it." His voice carried old pain, but also something softer. Curiosity, maybe. "You said you didn't know about me." "Not until I read the journal. I searched for words. "I'm still understanding what it means, for both of us." Another pause. Then, what was she like, as a mother? The question caught me off guard. I'd been preparing for anger, for accusations of complicity in her silence. Instead, he wanted to know something simple and impossible: who she'd been in the dailiness of life. "Quiet," I said slowly. "Very contained. She taught piano. She made excellent pot roast. I stopped, feeling the inadequacy of these details. She loved carefully, like she was always afraid of losing things, which makes sense now. Did she seem happy? I thought about my childhood, about my mother's rare smiles, about the way she'd watch me with an intensity that used to make me uncomfortable. I think she was happy in moments, but she carried something heavy. I always felt it, but never understood what it was. I thought it was just her personality. I didn't know it was grief." James breathed out slowly. "When I found her, when I first made contact, I was so angry. I wanted her to justify everything, to make it make sense. But the more I learned about what actually happened, about her parents forcing her hand, about the time period," he trailed off, "it doesn't make it hurt less. But it's more complicated than I wanted it to be. She wrote that you stopped taking her calls." "Yeah." Guilt colored his voice. We both thought that it was hurting more than helping. I'd spend days after talking to her just spiraling, mourning a childhood I never had with her, getting angry at people who are dead. It was exhausting. We have kids, and I was bringing all this pain into our house. "I understand," I said, and I did. "I'm not trying to resurrect anything painful. I just thought you should know I exist. We're connected. And if you ever want to know anything about her, about our family, I have the journal. I have her stories." "Can I ask you something?" James said. "In the journal, did she write about my father? Michael?" "Yes. A lot, actually." "Did she—" He struggled with the question. "Did she ever find out what happened to him? Why he left?" I flipped through my memory of the journal entries. "No, he just disappeared. She looked for him but never found answers." "I found him," James said quietly. 2 years ago. Or what happened to him anyway." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "He died in 1980, March. A car accident in Boston. That's where he'd gone home to his sister's place. He was going to earn money, get stable, come back for her. He was killed before he could." The timeline clicked into place. Michael had disappeared in December 1979, right when my mother was newly pregnant. He died in March 1980, while she was being sent away to the home for unwed mothers. He'd never known about James. He'd never abandoned them intentionally. He'd simply died, and my mother had spent decades thinking he'd chosen to leave. "Does the journal mention anything about that?" James asked. "About her finding out?" "No, I don't think she ever knew." "God," James whispered. "She spent her whole life thinking he abandoned us." We sat with that for a long moment, the tragedy of it echoing through the phone line. So many misunderstandings, so much unnecessary pain. If my mother had known Michael was dead, would it have changed anything? Maybe not the adoption. Her parents would have forced that regardless. But at least she would have known the truth. At least she wouldn't have spent decades believing the man she loved had simply walked away. "I'm going to send you something," James said finally. "Some letters Michael wrote to his sister before he died. She gave them to me when I found her. He wrote about my mother in them, about coming back for her. I think you should have copies." "Thank you," I managed. "And Catherine?" His voice softened. "Maybe we could talk again sometime, not right away, but eventually. I'd like to know more about her, and about you." "I'd like that too." After we hung up, I sat holding the phone, feeling something shift inside me. The grief was still there for my mother's lost years, for James's confused childhood, for Michael's unrealized future. But there was also something else. Connection, understanding. The sense that by speaking these secrets aloud, by refusing to let them remain buried, we were doing something my mother had never quite managed to do. We were choosing truth over silence. The funeral had been small, attended mostly by her piano students and a few church friends. No one had known the full scope of her life. I hadn't planned to hold a memorial service, but now I found myself wanting to mark her story properly, to honor not just the woman I'd known, but the woman she'd been before life forced her into hiding. I called the church and reserved the community room for the following Saturday. Then, I made calls to extended family cousins I rarely saw, my father's brother, a few of my mother's old colleagues. I told them I'd found some of her writings and wanted to share them. The night before the gathering, I sat down with the journal and carefully transcribed several entries, choosing ones that revealed her complexity without betraying her privacy entirely. I included her entries about falling in love with Michael, her anguish over James, her determination to build a good life for me despite her broken heart. I wanted people to know that her quietness hadn't been weakness or coldness. It had been survival. When Saturday came, about 20 people gathered in the church basement. I'd set up chairs in a semicircle and placed a photo of my mother at 23:1 of Michael's sketches that I'd photographed, alongside the formal portrait from her funeral. I stood in front of them, the journal in my hands, and I told the truth. "I thought I knew my mother," I began. "I thought she was a simple woman who lived a quiet life. After she died, I found this hidden in her room, and I learned that she'd lived an entire other existence that none of us knew about. She'd loved and lost in ways I'd never imagined. She'd made impossible choices. She'd carried secrets that shaped everything about who she was." I read selections from the journal. I told them about Michael, about James, about the decades of hidden grief. I showed them the photographs. As I spoke, I watched faces change, surprise, sadness, recognition. Several people cried. One of her oldest piano students, now in her 50s, raised her hand. "I always wondered why she played so sadly," the woman said. "Even when she was teaching us happy songs, there was something melancholy in the way she touched the keys. Now I understand." Others shared similar observations: her tendency to stare out windows, her reluctance to attend celebrations, the way she'd flinch when people asked if she wanted more children. They'd all noticed her sadness, but hadn't known its source. My uncle, my father's brother, stood up, his face troubled. "Did Richard know about any of this?" "No," I said firmly. "She kept it from him, not because she didn't trust him, but because she was trying to protect us all, including herself." He nodded slowly, sitting back down. "She loved him, you know. Maybe not the way she loved that first man, but she loved him. She was a good wife." "She was," I agreed. "She was a good mother, too. But she was also a human being who'd been through trauma. She was both things at once, the woman we knew and the woman who'd been forced to give up her child. We don't have to choose which version was real. They both were." After the gathering, several people came up to thank me for sharing the story. One of my mother's church friends, an elderly woman named Helen, took my hand and held it tight. "Your mother and I used to pray together sometimes," Helen said. "She never told me about the baby, but she'd pray for those who are lost. I always wondered who she meant. Now I know." She squeezed my hand. She's with him now, dear. She's with both of them, Michael and James. In whatever way matters, they're together. I didn't believe in that kind of afterlife, but the thought was comforting anyway. Over the following months, James and I began a cautious correspondence. Email mostly, sometimes phone calls. We shared stories about our mother, trying to build a composite picture from our different perspectives. He told me about their difficult meetings, how she'd tried so hard to be what he needed, while also protecting herself from more hurt. I told him about growing up in her careful love, about piano lessons and scraped knees, and the way she'd cried at my college graduation. She was terrified of losing you, James said during one call. Every time we talked, she'd mention you. She'd say things like, Catherine has a cold, or Catherine got a promotion, in this tone that was pure anxiety. Like if she took her eyes off you for a second, you'd disappear? I thought she was just overprotective, I said. Helicoptering. But it was more than that, wasn't it? She'd already lost one child. She couldn't bear to lose another. We're the same in that way, James said thoughtfully. We both grew up with a mother who was haunted. Mine was just the ghost instead of living with it. He sent me letters Michael had written to his sister, beautiful, passionate letters about his love for my mother, his plans for their future, his excitement about being an artist in New York. In one, written 2 weeks before he died, Michael wrote, I'm coming back for her in April, as soon as I have enough money saved. I'm going to marry her, Clara. I'm going to take her away from that suffocating town and her terrible parents, and we're going to build a life together. I've never been more certain of anything. She's my muse, my heart, my reason for believing the world can be beautiful. He'd never known my mother was pregnant. He'd died planning a future that had already been taken away from both of them. I cried when I read those letters, grieving for people I'd never met, for possibilities that had died on a Boston road in 1980. But there was also something healing about it. My mother had spent her life thinking Michael had abandoned her. Now I could hold the truth. He'd loved her until the moment he died. It didn't change what happened, but it changed the meaning of what happened. I drove to my mother's grave one afternoon in April, around the time of what would have been James's 43rd birthday. I brought flowers and Michael's letters, and I sat on the grass beside her headstone. I know the truth now, I told her, speaking to the carved stone as if she could hear me. I know about James. I know about Michael. I know why you were the way you were. The spring wind rustled through the cemetery trees. A bird sang somewhere nearby. I'm not angry, I continued. I wish you'd told me, but I understand why you didn't. You were trying to protect everyone, me, Dad, James, yourself. You were trying to make something good out of something that broke you. I placed my hand on the cold stone. I met him. Your son. My brother. He's doing okay. He has a family. He's complicated about you, but he's trying to understand. We both are. I opened the folder containing Michael's letters and read one aloud, the wind carrying the words across the quiet cemetery. When I finished, I folded it carefully and placed it under a rock beside the flowers. He loved you, I said. He was coming back. He died trying to get back to you. I thought you should know that. Wherever you are, whatever you believe now, I hope somehow you know that he never abandoned you. He never stopped loving you. I sat there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. As I stood to leave, I made a decision. It took me 3 more months to arrange everything. James was hesitant at first, his wife even more so, but eventually they agreed. In July, on a weekend when their children were at summer camp, James and his wife Sarah flew to visit me. I picked them up at the airport, and the moment I saw him walking through arrivals, my breath caught. He looked so much like the sketches of my mother, so much like me, the same eyebrows, the same way of holding his shoulders. We were strangers, but we were also unmistakably family. We stood awkwardly in the airport terminal, not sure whether to hug or shake hands. Finally, James stepped forward and embraced me, and I felt something in my chest break open, not painfully, but like a door that had been locked, finally swinging wide. "Hi, sister," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Hi, brother," I whispered back. I'd prepared my mother's house for their visit, airing it out, filling it with fresh flowers. The journal sat on the kitchen table alongside the photographs and Michael's letters. I'd also framed several of Michael's sketches of my mother and hung them throughout the house, bringing her young, joyful face back into the spaces where she'd lived out her quiet grief. That first evening, the three of us sat at the kitchen table, the same table where my mother had eaten thousands of meals, where she'd helped me with homework, where she'd sit alone after my father died, staring at nothing. I made coffee, and we spread out the contents of her secret life between us. James picked up the photograph of himself as a newborn, his hands trembling slightly. 20 minutes, he said. That's all she got. She made them count, I said, opening the journal to an entry I'd marked. I read aloud. I memorized everything, the shape of his fingernails, the way his left ear folded slightly at the top, the birthmark on his right ankle, the sound of his breathing. I took inventory of every detail because I knew I'd have to live on those 20 minutes for the rest of my life. James's eyes filled with tears. Sarah, his wife, took his hand and held it tightly. I have something to show you, I said, standing. I led them to my old bedroom, which I'd transformed into a sort of memorial space. On the walls, I'd created a timeline of our mother's life using photographs, journal entries, and documents I'd found. The timeline started with her childhood stern parents, a rigid religious household. Then came the explosion of color that was her relationship with Michael sketches, diary entries filled with joy and discovery. Then the pregnancy, the forced separation, the adoption, years of gray entries following, documenting her careful, contained life with my father and me. Finally, the rekindling with James in 2018, and the bittersweet coda of their brief, complicated reunion. This is her whole story, I said, not just the parts we each knew, all of it. James walked slowly along the wall, reading entries, studying photographs. When he reached the section about their meetings, he stopped. I was so angry during these, he said, touching a printed email she'd sent him in 2019. She tried so hard to connect with me, and I kept pushing her away because I wanted her to fix something that couldn't be fixed. I wanted her to give me back the childhood we didn't have together. You were grieving, Sarah said gently. You're still grieving. She was too, I added. She grieved you her entire adult life. 42 years of grief. That's what her life was, one long act of mourning. James turned to me, his face anguished. How do you forgive something like that? How do you forgive her parents for forcing that choice? How do you forgive a system that tore families apart? I don't know, I said honestly. But I think she asked herself the same question every day. How do you forgive the unforgivable? How do you live with what can't be changed? And what did she decide? James asked. I thought about my mother's life, the piano lessons, the garden, the quiet dinners, the way she'd braided my hair and attended every school play, and never, not once, let me see the full depth of her sorrow. I think she decided that you survive by containing it, I said. You build walls around the grief, and you keep living. You love what you can love, even if you can't love the way you want to. You do the best you can with what you have left. We spent the weekend going through everything, reading journal entries aloud, examining photographs, sharing our different memories of the same woman. James told stories about their awkward meetings, how she'd been so nervous that she'd spilled coffee on herself at their first reunion, how she'd brought him a baby blanket she'd knitted for him 40 years ago and never sent. I told him about her daily routines, her students, the way she'd hum while cooking, how she'd cry during sentimental commercials, but maintain perfect composure during actual crises. We pieced together a fuller portrait of her, not the tragic figure forced to give up her child, not the quiet mother who'd raised me, but a complex woman who'd been both of those things, and more. On the last evening, James asked to visit her grave. We drove there at sunset, the three of us, and stood before her headstone. James had brought flowers, white roses, the same kind Michael used to paint her holding. "I forgive you," James said to the stone, his voice breaking. "I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, or if it even makes sense, but I do. I forgive you for the choices you didn't get to make. I forgive you for not being able to fix what was broken. I forgive you for being human." He knelt and placed the roses against the headstone, then pressed his palm to her name. "I wish we'd had more time. I wish we'd figured out how to talk to each other without all the pain getting in the way. But I'm glad I knew you, even briefly. I'm glad I'm not a secret anymore." I knelt beside him and took his hand. "You were never really a secret," I said. "You were always part of her. Every choice she made, every way she loved me, was shaped by you. You were present even in your absence." Sarah joined us, and the three of us stayed there as night fell, holding space for all the grief and love and missed chances that had brought us to this moment. That night, back at the house, I gave James the journal. "This is yours," I said. "More yours than mine, really. She wrote it for both of us, but you're the one who lives most in these pages." He held it carefully, reverently. "What will you do with everything else? The house?" I'd been thinking about that for weeks. "I want to turn it into something," I said. "Maybe a space for support groups, for adoptees, for birth mothers, for families dealing with forced separations. There are so many people carrying these secrets, living with this kind of grief. Maybe her house could become a place where people don't have to hide anymore." James's face lit up. "She'd like that. She'd like the idea of her pain meaning something, helping someone." "Will you help me?" I asked. "Not with the logistics necessarily, but with telling her story? With making sure people understand what families like ours go through?" "Yes," he said immediately. "Absolutely yes." We stayed up late that night, making plans, imagining futures. Sarah fell asleep on the couch, but James and I kept talking, the way siblings do when they're making up for lost time. We talked about our childhoods, our careers, our fears and hopes. We talked about our mother, about Michael, about the strange inheritance of intergenerational trauma. "Do you think she'd be happy?" James asked as dawn began to break outside the windows. "Knowing we found each other? Knowing we're trying to do something good with her story?" I thought about the last entry in her journal, her plea for understanding and forgiveness. I thought about the woman who'd hidden her heart so carefully that even the people who loved her never saw its full shape. "I think she'd be terrified," I said honestly. Exposing secrets was her worst nightmare, but I also think she'd be relieved. She was so tired, James. Tired of carrying everything alone. Tired of being split between the life she had and the life she'd lost. Maybe she'd be glad that we're carrying it together now, that she doesn't have to protect us from the truth anymore. James nodded slowly. "I spent so long being angry that she gave me away. But reading these entries, seeing her life, she didn't give me away. She had me taken from her. There's a difference." "A big difference," I agreed. He looked at me seriously. "Thank you for finding this. For not just putting it back and pretending you never saw it. For choosing truth over comfortable ignorance." "I don't know if it's better," I admitted. "Knowing is painful. There are moments I wish I could unsee it all, go back to my simple understanding of who she was." "But you can't," James said. "No, I can't. None of us can. Once you know the truth, you have to decide what to do with it." "And what are we doing with it?" I smiled, feeling something like hope unfurl in my chest. "We're making sure she wasn't invisible. We're making sure her pain mattered. We're making sure that James Michael, born August 2nd, 1980, held for 20 minutes and mourned for 42 years, gets to exist in the world as more than just a secret. And we're making sure that her love, as complicated and imperfect as it was, gets remembered," James added. We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun rise over the kitchen where our mother had stood so many mornings, looking out the window at a world that held her lost son somewhere beyond her reach. But we'd reached him. We'd found each other. And in finding each other, we'd found the fuller truth of her, the girl who'd fallen in love recklessly, the woman who'd been broken by circumstance, the mother who'd loved two children in two different ways across two different lives. She wasn't just the quiet piano teacher anymore. She wasn't just the woman who'd been forced to give up her child. She was all of it, the passion and the grief, the secrets and the survival, the love that couldn't save her, but had, in the end, brought her children together. 6 months later, we held the first meeting at what we now called Sarah's house, named not for James's wife, but for the name our mother had wanted to give her child if she'd been a girl. The house had been modified slightly, more seating, better lighting, a small kitchen for making coffee and tea. But we'd kept her piano, her photographs, her garden. 15 people came that first night. Birth mothers, adoptees, foster children, people who'd been separated from family by circumstance or force. They sat in a circle in my mother's living room, and one by one, they told their stories. I told mine. James told his. And then others opened up, releasing secrets they'd carried for decades, speaking truths they'd never said aloud. A woman in her 60s talked about the baby she'd given up in 1978, the same year my mother had gotten pregnant. "I've never told my husband," she whispered. "He doesn't know I had a child before we met. I've been carrying this alone for 45 years. An adoptee in his 30s spoke about finding his birth mother only to discover she'd died 2 years earlier. "I was too late," he said, his voice raw. "I'll never get to ask her why. I'll never get to know if she thought about me." Each story was different, but they all carried the same weight, the pain of separation, the burden of secrets, the grief of choices that couldn't be unmade. At the end of the evening, as people were leaving, the 60-year-old woman approached me. "Thank you for creating this space," she said. "Thank you for letting us be honest about the things we're not allowed to talk about." "It wasn't me," I said, gesturing to my mother's photograph on the mantel. "It was her. She carried these secrets alone, and it nearly destroyed her. We're just making sure no one else has to do that." The woman looked at the photograph for a long moment. "She was beautiful," she said. "Yes," I agreed. "She was. In ways I never understood until it was too late." I still find myself talking to my mother sometimes. When I'm in her house, setting up for meetings, I'll pause by her photograph and tell her what's happening. I tell her about James, about his kids, her grandchildren, whom she never got to meet. I tell her about the people who come to Sarah's house, the stories they share, the healing that happens in her living room. I don't know if she can hear me. I don't know if consciousness survives death, if she's somehow aware of what we've built from her pain. But it doesn't matter. Speaking to her helps me process my own grief, my own complicated feelings about the mother I thought I knew versus the woman who actually existed. I'm angry sometimes. Angry that she never told me, that she let me grow up thinking I was an only child, that she maintained her silence even when it hurt us both. But I'm also awed by her strength, by her ability to survive something that might have destroyed someone else. She woke up every day for 42 years and chose to keep living, keep loving, keep hoping even when hope seemed pointless. That takes a kind of courage I'm not sure I possess. James and I talk every week now. We're learning how to be siblings in middle age, figuring out what connection looks like when you don't have childhood memories to bond over. It's awkward sometimes. We're still strangers in many ways. But we're trying, and that's something. His kids know about me now. They call me Aunt Catherine. I sent them birthday presents this year, the first time I've ever been an aunt. When his daughter sent me a thank you note, she drew a picture of our family tree, including a portrait of our mother at the top, with her arms spread wide, one hand reaching toward each of her children. I cried when I saw it, because that's what she'd wanted, wasn't it? To hold both of us, to love both of us openly, but she'd never been allowed that. The world she'd been born into had forced her to choose silence over truth, secrets over connection. We can't give her that now. We can't go back and unmake her pain. But we can honor it. We can make sure it wasn't meaningless. We can take the broken pieces of her story and build something whole. It's been a year since I found the journal. The house that was once so full of silence now rings with voices every week. People sharing, crying, laughing, healing. James visits every few months, and each time, he brings something new he's discovered about our mother, or Michael, or the tangled web of circumstances that shaped our family. Last month, he found Michael's sister, Clara, still alive at 89, and living in a nursing home in Boston. She remembered our mother. That beautiful girl your father was so crazy about, she called her. She still had some of Michael's paintings, including 3 portraits of my mother, that she gifted to us. They hang now in Sarah's house, in the room we've designated as a memorial space. Young, radiant, alive. That's how Michael saw her. That's who she was before grief carved her into something quieter, more contained. Sometimes people who come to our meetings ask about the paintings, about the woman with the wild hair and joyful eyes. And I tell them her story. Not the sanitized version, not the comfortable lie, but the truth. Messy, painful, complicated, and real. I tell them she was 23 and in love. I tell them she was forced to give up her child. I tell them she spent 42 years carrying a grief so heavy it shaped every breath she took. I tell them she survived anyway. She loved anyway. She built a life anyway, even though part of her remained frozen in that hospital room, holding her son for 20 minutes that had to last forever. And I tell them the end of the story, the part she didn't live to see. That her children found each other. That her secrets became bridges instead of walls. That her silence was broken not with judgment, but with understanding. Not with shame, but with compassion. People cry when I tell them this. They cry because they see themselves in her story, their own secrets, their own griefs, their own impossible choices. And then they speak. They open up. They let their own truths into the light. This is what my mother gave us in the end. Not just a diary, not just a revelation, but permission to be fully human, fully flawed, fully honest about the ways life breaks us and the ways we survive the breaking. I keep the journal in a glass case now, open to that first page. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I never had the courage to show you. But she was wrong about that, I think. Hiding the journal where I'd find it, writing down the truth even when she couldn't speak it aloud, that took courage too. A different kind of courage than telling us directly, but courage nonetheless. She left us breadcrumbs. She left us a path back to her real self, the self she'd buried under decades of protective silence. And in following that path, James and I found not just her, but each other. Late at night, when Sarah's house is empty and I'm locking up, I sometimes stand in the center of my mother's living room and feel her presence. Not in a mystical way, I don't believe in ghosts, but in the weight of memory, in the echo of all the years she spent in these rooms, carrying her secret sorrow. "We did it, Mom," I whisper into the darkness. "We made something good out of what broke you. We made sure you weren't invisible. We made sure James wasn't forgotten. We told the truth." The house settles around me, old boards creaking, familiar sounds. And I imagine, just for a moment, that somewhere beyond the veil of death and time, she knows. She sees what we've built from her pain. And she's finally at peace. Because the greatest tragedy wasn't that she had to give up her son. It wasn't even that she had to carry that grief alone for 4 decades. The greatest tragedy would have been if her story ended with silence, if the truth died with her, if her pain meant nothing. But it didn't end that way. It ended with 2 siblings standing in an airport, embracing for the first time. It ended with a house full of people speaking truths they'd never spoken. It ended with love complicated, imperfect, hard-won love, triumphing over the forces that tried to bury it. My mother hid a diary in her room, and it revealed a life I never knew existed. But in revealing her life, it also revealed something about my own. That truth matters more than comfort. that love survives even impossible circumstances, and that the stories we hide from the world have a way of finding their way back to the light. I just wish she'd lived to see it. I wish she'd known that her secrets, once spoken, would become not shameful things to bury, but sacred things to honor. I wish she'd known that being fully known, even in her pain, even in her mistakes, would make her more loved, not less. But maybe, in leaving the diary where I'd find it, she did know. Maybe she understood that the only way to truly be free was to let the truth be told, even if she couldn't tell it herself. So I tell it for her. James tells it, and everyone who comes through the doors of Sarah's house tells it in their own way, adding their stories to hers, weaving a tapestry of truth from the threads of all our hidden lives. The diary sits in its glass case, open to that first page, a testament to a woman who loved too much, lost too much, and survived anyway. And every time someone reads those words, "If you are reading this, then I am gone," and you have found what I never had the courage to show you, they understand. They understand that courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's hiding the truth where someone will eventually find it, trusting that love will be strong enough to survive the revelation. My mother was right about so many things, but she was wrong about one. She did have courage. Immense courage. The courage to survive, to love, to hope, and finally, to trust that the truth would set us free. And it did.